The royal family has finally spoken, and the truth about Prince William is far more tragic than anyone imagined. For weeks, whispers circled the palace, strange silences filled public events, and now, the heartbreaking reason has been revealed. The man once known for his calm and courage is facing something no crown can protect him from. This has shaken him deeply, insiders said softly. Behind the golden gates, something has changed forever. As Britain mourns beside him, one question lingers in every heart. Can the future king survive what comes next? The silence before the storm. The sky above Windsor Castle was a dull, heavy gray. The early morning mist drifted low over the gardens, curling around the gates like it was guarding something secret. The castle, usually filled with soft sounds of movement and life, was disturbingly still. Not a single bell rang, not a single laugh echoed down the corridors. It was as if time itself had paused inside those ancient walls. Outside, a quiet crowd had gathered. Reporters stood in tight clusters, their faces pale from the cold and from curiosity. They were used to waiting, but not like this. Something in the air felt different, thicker, heavier, almost sacred. The usual buzz of chatter had turned into tense whispers. Every eye stayed fixed on the long driveway leading from the royal residence. Then, at 7:30, a black car appeared. It rolled slowly toward the gates, tires crunching over the gravel. A figure stepped out, Princess Catherine. She was dressed neatly but simply, her long coat fastened tight against the chill. There was no wave, no smile, no trace of her usual warmth. Her face looked drained of color, her eyes distant. A reporter near the gate whispered, "That's her. But where's William?" Catherine kept her head lowered as she moved toward the car. For a brief second, she paused, clutching the door handle as if steadying herself. Her hand trembled. Then she slipped inside, the car door shutting with a dull thud that seemed to echo through the waiting crowd. The vehicle pulled away, disappearing into the fog. Inside the castle, the quiet was almost unbearable. The faint ticking of the hallway clock was the only sound breaking through the stillness. Staff members moved softly, their shoes barely touching the floor. Faces were pale, voices hushed. In every corner, people exchanged glances, communicating without words. Something had happened, something big. In the private wing, the royal nanny stood at the window with Prince George and Princess Charlotte. Both children were still in their pajamas, staring out at the fog-covered gardens. "Mummy said we're not going to school today," Charlotte said quietly. The nanny gave a small nod. "That's right, sweetheart. You'll stay home today," George frowned. "But why?" The woman hesitated before replying softly, "Just for family reasons, my dear. Nothing to worry about." But the truth sat heavy in her chest. She could see the worry on Catherine's face that morning, the same fear that now lingered through the entire palace like an invisible mist. Prince William had not been seen for several days. His last public appearance had been only a week earlier, a charity event in London. Those who were there remembered the moment clearly. The prince had looked pale, distracted, and withdrawn. Midway through the speech, he had paused, pressed his hand to his forehead, and left the stage with a quiet apology. The palace later said he was feeling unwell, but that explanation had done little to calm the growing concern. Now the silence spoke louder than any official statement. The sound of Catherine's heels clicking across the marble hallway echoed sharply, carrying her presence ahead of her like a soft alarm. She paused for a moment outside a tall wooden door, the king's study. Taking a deep breath, she knocked gently. A low voice from within answered, "Come in." Inside, King Charles sat by the window, his head bowed, his hands clasped tightly together. The morning light touched his hair, turning it silver in the gloom. He looked up as Catherine entered. She did not speak. She did not need to. He simply nodded, his expression grave and distant. "Thank you for handling this," he murmured. His voice was low, rough with exhaustion. Catherine sat quietly across from him. "The children are at home," she said softly. "They're asking questions." The king closed his eyes for a moment. "They're too young to understand." There was a long pause. Outside, a single bird called out before falling silent again. Catherine's fingers twisted nervously in her lap. The sound of her wedding ring brushing against her other hand was faint, but sharp. "Do we tell them?" she asked. He hesitated before answering. "Not yet." The room fell still again. Even the ticking of the clock seemed to fade. Downstairs, the communications team had gathered in a small office. Papers were spread across the table. Phones buzzed quietly. The tension was thick enough to choke on. They had received instructions to prepare a statement, but only a short one. No details, no explanations. Just enough to calm the storm that was already brewing outside. One of the aides, a young man with tired eyes, looked up and said softly, "This will change everything." At exactly 4 o'clock that afternoon, a royal spokesperson stepped outside the castle. The royal family requests privacy as they deal with a personal matter involving the Prince of Wales. That was all. The words hung in the air, simple but devastating. The crowd went silent. The rain grew louder, washing across the courtyard. Reporters looked at one another, unsure whether to speak or to stay quiet. Inside the castle, Catherine stood by the window of a dimly lit corridor. From there, she could see the reporters scattering, the umbrellas opening, the flashes of cameras disappearing into the mist. Her reflection stared back at her, pale and tired. She pressed her hand to the glass and whispered softly, "Pardon, William, just come back to us." The evening fell like a curtain. The castle lights glowed faintly against the fog, turning the stone walls into shadows. Servants moved quietly, closing drapes and locking doors. The house of whispered fears. A cold wind swept through the long drive leading to Sandringham estate, bending the trees that lined the gravel road. The grand house stood in stillness, its windows glowing dimly against the dark sky. Inside, the royal family had gathered, not for a celebration, not for a duty, but for something none of them could name aloud. The air was tense, heavy with unspoken words. Every clock ticked louder than usual. Servants moved quietly, careful not to disturb the strange quiet that had taken over the royal home. It felt as though even the walls were listening. King Charles sat by the fire in the drawing room, his hands clasped tightly together. The flames danced in his tired eyes, reflecting the face of a man who had aged in a single night. His crown had never felt so heavy. Across from him sat Queen Camilla, silent, her usual confidence replaced by worry. She stirred her tea without drinking it, her gaze lost in the flickering fire. "Has there been any word from Catherine?" she asked softly. Charles shook his head. His voice was low, almost broken. "Not yet. She's with him." The words fell heavily between them. The door opened quietly. A private secretary entered, whispering, "Your Majesty, Prince Harry has arrived." Charles looked up, his expression unreadable. "Show him in." Moments later, Harry stepped into the room. His coat was still damp from the cold rain outside, his face pale from the long flight. There were no photographers, no flashing lights, no public smiles, just a son returning home to a family drowning in silence. He hesitated for a moment before saying softly, "I came as soon as I heard." Charles nodded, rising slowly from his chair. For a long moment they stood face to face, father and son both carrying regrets too heavy for words. Then Charles placed a trembling hand on Harry's shoulder. "Thank you for coming," he murmured. Camilla rose quietly and left the room, giving them space. The fire crackled between them as they sat down. "What happened?" Harry asked at last. Charles exhaled shakily. "William's been unwell. For weeks he pushed himself too far. Catherine tried to stop him, but he wouldn't listen." Harry looked down, his jaw tightening. "And now? He's under medical observation," Charles said softly. "That's all the doctors will say." The room went quiet again, filled only by the soft hiss of the fire. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing over the estate like a curtain of sorrow. Staff members spoke in hushed tones, knowing the press would soon find out that something was wrong. Catherine had been seen every morning driving from Windsor to the private clinic near London, where Prince William was being treated. Her eyes were red from tears, her smile forced whenever cameras caught a glimpse of her. She had become the image of quiet grief, graceful, but barely holding on. In the privacy of William's room, she sat beside him, her hand resting over his. Machines hummed softly, their sounds filling the spaces between her whispered prayers. "You promised me," she said one evening, her voice trembling. Back at Sandringham, the tension grew thicker. The royal family stayed out of sight. Curtains were drawn, phones left unanswered. Camilla visited the small chapel each morning, lighting a single candle in silence. Charles spent hours by the window, watching the rain fall over the gardens where William used to run as a boy. One afternoon, a faint sound of laughter drifted from the nursery. It was from a memory, not the present. Charles closed his eyes, hearing echoes of his son's childhood. How quickly it all slips away, he whispered to himself. Harry joined him later, standing quietly beside his father. I remember when he used to race me across the lawns, Harry said with a sad smile. He never let me win. Charles nodded slowly. He never let anyone win, he replied softly. Not even life. As night fell, the estate glowed faintly under the moonlight. The press outside the gates had already begun to build stories, rumors of collapse, of secret diagnoses, of royal crisis. The family asks for understanding and privacy. Those few words sent a shiver through the nation. Every headline carried his name. Every newsreader spoke his title with a hush. Inside, the family's world had shrunk to whispers and waiting. Camilla sat with Charles again that evening, her voice low. You should rest, she urged gently. I cannot, he said. Every time I close my eyes, I see him as a boy, running down those halls, laughing. I keep hearing his voice. Camilla reached out, placing her hand over his. He's strong, Charles. He'll come back to us. But his eyes betrayed the truth, a father's fear, raw and unguarded. I don't know if I can lose another piece of this family, he murmured. At midnight, a car arrived quietly at the gates. Catherine stepped out, her eyes swollen, her steps slow. She was escorted inside, her heels echoing through the empty halls. In the drawing room, Charles rose to meet her. How is he? He asked. Her lips quivered. He's fighting, she said softly. He's tired, but he's fighting. Harry closed his eyes in silent relief. Camilla reached for Catherine's hand. No one spoke after that. There were no royal words, no formalities, just the quiet breathing of four people sitting together, united by love and fear. When the light faded at Kensington, the sky over London was heavy and colorless, the kind of gray that seeps into everything. Outside Kensington Palace, cameras lined the gates, rain dripping softly off umbrellas as reporters whispered to one another. It had been weeks since the nation had last seen Prince William, and though the palace tried to hold the silence together, the cracks were showing. That morning, the tension broke. A car pulled up to the front entrance, and Princess Catherine stepped out. She looked calm, almost composed, but her eyes told a different story. They were red from sleepless nights, her skin pale, her movements slow and careful, as though even breathing hurt. She had faced crowds countless times before, but this time was different. This time, the world wasn't watching their future queen. They were watching a woman trying not to fall apart. The press waited, cameras pointed, hearts pounding. When she reached the podium, her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone. For a moment, she just stood there, her gaze lost somewhere beyond the flashing lights. Then she spoke, her voice soft, her accent steady but strained. I want to thank everyone for your love and kindness, she said. It has meant more to us than I can ever express. She paused, swallowing hard, her breath catching. These last few weeks have been very difficult for our family, but your prayers, your letters, your thoughts, they've kept us strong. Her voice cracked on that last word. A tear escaped down her cheek. She did not try to hide it. The cameras zoomed closer, but she did not look away. William is receiving the best care possible, she continued, her words slower now. Then she managed a faint, fragile smile. Pardon, keep him in your hearts, she whispered. He needs it. With that, she turned away from the cameras, her composure finally slipping as she walked back to the waiting car. The door closed behind her with a soft click, shutting out the noise, the lights, the endless questions. Inside the car, she pressed her forehead to the cold glass. Her tears came quietly this time, silent and constant. She did not bother to wipe them away. When she arrived at St. Mary's Hospital, the corridors greeted her with sterile light and the faint hum of machines. She had come every day, sometimes twice. She would sit beside William's bed for hours, holding his hand, whispering things only he could hear. His face was pale but peaceful, the rise and fall of his chest the only sound she listened for. Do you remember the garden at Anmere? She said softly one afternoon, her fingers brushing over his. The one where the children chased butterflies? You promised we'd take them there again this summer. Her words trembled in the air. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and flowers someone had left by the window. She stared at his still face and blinked back the tears that burned behind her eyes. Every memory came back like a flood, his laughter echoing through the halls, the way he carried George on his shoulders, his quiet strength when the world seemed too heavy. She remembered his hand over hers, the warmth of it. Now it was cold. At home, the children asked questions she couldn't answer. George wanted to know when Daddy would be back. Charlotte asked if he was sleeping. Louis, too young to understand, kept asking, "Where's Daddy gone?" Catherine would smile, brush their hair, and say softly, "He's getting better." The brothers hadn't been seen together in months, but tonight, all distance fell away. When Harry entered the room, he froze for a moment, staring at his brother lying still beneath the white sheets. Catherine rose and nodded at him. "He'll be glad you're here," she whispered. Then she stepped out, leaving them alone. Harry pulled a chair beside the bed. For a long time, he said nothing. He just watched, listening to the rhythmic sound of William's breathing. Then, in a low voice, he said, "Hey, mate, it's been a while." He looked down, his hands clasped together. "You've always been the strong one," he continued softly. "I should have said it before. You held everything together. The family, the name, even when it wasn't fair." His voice broke. "Just don't leave us now, yeah? We're not ready for that." The words hung in the quiet room, fragile and raw. He reached out, touched his brother's hand, and for a fleeting second thought he felt a faint squeeze in return. When Catherine returned, she found Harry still sitting there, tears shining in his eyes. He looked up at her and said simply, "He's fighting." That night, the palace released a statement. The television screens lit up across the world as news anchors read the words, slowly, carefully, their voices heavy with sympathy. "Prince William is receiving ongoing treatment for a serious health condition. The family is by his side." The words spread like a storm. Headlines changed in seconds. Across cities and small towns, people stopped what they were doing, listening, whispering prayers. Outside St. Mary's, candles began to appear, one by one at first, then dozens, then hundreds. The hospital gates shimmered in the light of flickering flames as strangers gathered, holding hands, standing together in silence. Inside, Catherine stood by the window, looking down at the crowd below. The sight of them, all those people who loved him without knowing him, made her heart ache in a way she couldn't describe. She turned back toward the bed, wiping her tears. "Look at them, William," she whispered. "They're all waiting for you. So am I." The machines hummed softly. The night stretched long, and somewhere between the sound of her heartbeat and the quiet rhythm of his breathing, hope flickered again. Fragile, but alive. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to whisper, "I know you'll come back to us." Outside, London glowed under a veil of candlelight, and though no one said it aloud, everyone felt it. The world was holding its breath for a prince who had become far more than a symbol. He was a son, a husband, a father, and in that fragile silence, love was all that remained. Britain held its breath for William. From small seaside towns to bustling city squares, people gathered silently, candles flickering in their hands, their faces reflecting the same emotion, sorrow. Outside royal residences, the scent of flowers filled the cold air. Bouquets wrapped in paper lay in endless rows, lilies, roses, wildflowers, each one placed with trembling hands and whispered prayers. Children had left drawings and cards, their small words written in colored pencils. "Get well soon, Prince William. We love you." Some left their favorite toys, thinking perhaps a small bear or car might bring him comfort. It was as if the entire country had stopped breathing. The television screens glowed in every home. His smile, once a symbol of calm strength, now brought tears to people's eyes. "He was always so real," an old woman whispered as she lit a candle outside Buckingham Palace. You could see his heart in his smile. Everywhere people gathered, in churches, parks, even bus stops, to share stories of kindness and hope. The air was cold, yet no one moved. There was a quiet understanding that something far greater than royalty was happening. Inside the palace walls, silence ruled too. The royal family was scattered between homes and hospitals, each clinging to the same fragile thread of hope. Then, late one afternoon, the Princess of Wales broke that silence in the gentlest way imaginable. No statement, no words, just a single photograph. It appeared on the official royal page. a dimly lit image taken from William's bedside. His hand, pale but steady, lay in hers. Catherine's fingers wrapped around it with tenderness that said everything her heart couldn't speak. The caption read only, "Together." Within minutes, the picture traveled across the world. News outlets replayed it endlessly. People wept as they looked at it, feeling both the pain and the beauty of it. A wife holding on to the man she loved, not as a prince, but as her partner, her heart. The image did not need words. It was love, quiet and pure. Later that evening, the BBC interrupted its regular programming. The familiar royal crest appeared on the screen, and the announcer's voice trembled slightly as he spoke. "The king wishes to address the nation." The world went still. When King Charles III appeared on screen, the years seemed to weigh on him like never before. His eyes were tired, his shoulders slumped, but his voice carried the strength of a father holding himself together for his family. "My fellow citizens," he began softly, his voice echoing through living rooms across the country. "Tonight I speak not as your king, but as a father." He paused, his lips tightening as if holding back tears. "The past weeks have been difficult beyond measure. My son William has shown extraordinary courage in the face of great challenges. He has always carried his duties with grace, kindness, and a heart full of love for this nation. And even now, that spirit endures." He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "We are deeply moved by the compassion you have shown, the prayers, the flowers, the messages from across the world. They remind us that though we are a royal family, we are also simply a family, one bound by love, hope, and faith." Behind the camera, Queen Camilla stood quietly, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. Her eyes glistened, but she remained still, her presence one of quiet comfort. The king looked down for a moment, then raised his gaze again. "William has always believed that love and unity are stronger than fear," he said, voice trembling. "Tonight, as a father and as your king, I ask that we continue to hold him and one another in that same love." He paused, his lips pressing into a thin line. "My son is fighting with the same courage he has shown all his life, and as long as he fights, we will stand beside him." When the message ended, there was silence across the nation. Even the news anchors seemed unsure how to speak again. The king's words had carried more than emotion. They carried the weight of an entire country's heart. Soon after, another message appeared online, this one from across the ocean. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, from their California home, released a short statement. "Our thoughts are with William, Catherine, and the entire family. We send love and strength during this difficult time." The statement was simple, but it struck something deep within the public. For a moment, all the noise, the rumors, the bitterness of the past melted away. The next morning, newspapers carried a headline that summed up the feeling of millions. "For William, we stand together." Church bells rang across the countryside. School children bowed their heads in the morning assembly. Shopkeepers dimmed their lights for a minute of silence. In pubs and cafes, people spoke softly, remembering moments when William had made them proud. His quiet humor, his compassion, the way he never turned away from duty. Outside St. Mary's Hospital, the crowd grew by the hour. Flowers now covered the entire gate, and the air shimmered with candlelight. People stood shoulder to shoulder, strangers holding hands, united by the same hope that the man they admired so deeply would open his eyes and smile again. Inside the hospital, the royal family gathered once more. Catherine sat by William's bedside, her head resting gently on their intertwined hands. King Charles stood by the window. For the first time in many years, there were no titles, no boundaries, just love. Outside, the wind moved through the city softly, carrying with it the hum of prayers and the flicker of candlelight. Across Britain, millions waited, not for news from the palace, not for royal appearances, but for one simple, human miracle, that he would wake, that he would smile again, that the light of Britain, their prince, their William, would shine once more. Night finally breathed again. It was midnight, and the hospital halls were almost silent. Only the soft hum of machines and the distant rhythm of rain against the glass broke the stillness. The world outside was asleep, but inside that room, the one everyone prayed for, time had stopped. Catherine sat beside William's bed, her eyes red from sleepless nights. The glow of the monitors painted her face in pale light. Every soft beep was a fragile promise that he was still here, still fighting. She hadn't left in days. The nurses had tried gently to persuade her to rest, but she couldn't. Her hand never left his. Sometimes she spoke, her voice trembling, her words spilling into the quiet like prayers. "George asked about you again," she whispered, brushing a strand of hair from William's forehead. "He wanted to know when Daddy's coming home. I told him soon. I told him you'd keep your promise." Her voice broke, but she continued. "Charlotte's been drawing pictures for you. She said she's making one for every day you're away so you will not miss a thing. And Louis," she smiled faintly, tears running down her cheeks. "Louis said he's saving all his hugs for you." She looked at his still face, her fingers tracing the lines of his hand. "They need you," she said softly. "We all do." The rain outside grew heavier, washing against the windows like a quiet storm. Inside the room, Catherine sat in that half-light, surrounded by the soft beeping of machines that marked the fragile rhythm of life. His shoulders sagged, the weight of the crown forgotten for now. Before him lay an old photograph, one he had carried quietly for years. It was of Diana, smiling brightly, the young William at her side. He stared at it for a long time, his hands trembling slightly. The memories came in waves, her laughter, her warmth, the way she had always protected their boys from the cold world outside the palace gates. "Watch over him, Diana," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Pardon, watch over our boy." His eyes glistened. He closed them and took a deep breath, as though reaching for strength in a place he hadn't visited in years. "He's just like you," he murmured, "brave, kind, and far too gentle for this world." Across the city, London glowed under the rain. Television screens stayed on through the night, the same image repeating on every channel. Catherine by his bedside, candles flickering outside the hospital, the palace's silent facade. People around the world couldn't sleep. In small flats and grand houses alike, candles burned in windows. The soft light flickered like a heartbeat of hope. For William, for Catherine, for the family that seemed so close to breaking. The hours stretched on. Midnight turned to 1, 1 turned to 2. Still, Catherine sat unmoving, whispering softly, her eyes fixed on his face. Then something changed. At first it was almost nothing. A small movement, barely a twitch. Catherine froze, her breath catching. Her hand tightened around his. She looked at him closely, afraid she had imagined it. But then it happened again. His fingers moved, slow, uncertain, but real. Her heart leapt. "William?" she breathed, her voice shaking. She leaned closer, tears welling. "William, can you hear me?" The monitors kept beeping steadily, the rain still whispering against the windows. And then, as if pulling himself from the deepest sleep, his eyelids fluttered. A second later, they opened. His eyes, tired, dazed but alive, met hers. For a moment Catherine couldn't speak, the world fell away. It was just them. He tried to say something, but no sound came. His lips trembled into the faintest of smiles. Catherine gasped, a sound caught between laughter and sob. She covered her mouth, then leaned forward, clutching his hand to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered, voice trembling with tears. "Oh, thank you." The doctors rushed in moments later. Nurses called for the consultant. Machines were checked, numbers adjusted, but Catherine barely heard them. Her world had already changed in that heartbeat when he opened his eyes. Minutes turned to hours, but this time they were hours filled with breath, with hope. Word spread quickly through the palace walls. Charles was still in the waiting room when the doctor appeared in the doorway. "Your Majesty," the doctor said softly, smiling for the first time in days. "He's awake." The king froze. For a second, he couldn't move. "You did it," he whispered. "You stayed with him." He rose slowly and made his way down the corridor, his heart pounding like it hadn't in years. When he reached the doorway, he saw Catherine still holding William's hand, her head bowed in quiet prayer. Charles stepped closer. His voice was barely audible. "My dear boy." William turned his head slightly, his voice faint but clear enough. "Father." It was just one word, but to Charles it was everything. He reached for his son's hand, placing his own gently over Catherine's. No words followed. None were wanted. The air in that small hospital room felt different now, lighter, filled with the soft hum of miracles. Outside, the rain began to ease. Clouds broke apart, revealing the faintest hint of dawn. Within hours, the news broke around the world. The palace released a short statement, only a few lines, but enough to make millions cry tears of relief. His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, is awake and recovering. The family wishes to thank everyone for their prayers and support during this difficult time across Britain. The night that had begun in sorrow ended in joy. Church bells rang at sunrise. People embraced in the streets. Candles still burned in windows, but now they were symbols of gratitude, not grief. Inside the hospital, Catherine finally allowed herself to rest. She laid her head gently beside William's arm, still holding his hand. He stirred faintly and whispered, "You did not leave." "Never," she murmured, smiling through her tears. And as dawn broke over London, the first rays of sunlight touched the window of that quiet hospital room. The garden remembers. The first light of dawn broke over Windsor Gardens, spilling softly across the dew-dusted grass. The air felt different, lighter, gentler, as though the whole world had taken a deep breath after holding it for too long. The birds sang as if they knew. The sun rose slowly, tenderly touching the leaves, turning them gold. Prince William walked down the narrow garden path, his steps unhurried. Catherine was beside him, her arm linked through his, her eyes never leaving him. He was still frail, his movements careful, but there was a glow in his face that hadn't been seen in months, a quiet peace, the kind that only comes after pain. The garden had always been his refuge. Long before the noise of royal duties, before titles and expectations, it had been his mother's favorite place. Princess Diana had brought him here often, teaching him the names of flowers, showing him where to listen for the first birdsong. Now, years later, walking through the same garden felt like walking through memory. Catherine smiled softly as they moved past the roses. "They're all blooming again," she said. William nodded. "It's strange," he murmured. "Everything feels new, as if the world decided to start over." He stopped near a stone bench, resting for a moment. The early morning mist curled around them like a whisper. "There was a time," he said quietly, "when I wasn't sure I'd see another morning like this." Catherine turned to him, her expression full of warmth and strength. "You're here now," she said, her hand resting on his. "That's what matters." He looked at her, truly looked, and something in his eyes softened. "I wouldn't be if it weren't for you," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "You never left my side. You, Father, Harry, you carried me when I couldn't stand." A breeze moved through the garden, lifting the edge of his coat, carrying the scent of lilac. William breathed deeply, the air filling his lungs with something more than oxygen, hope. "I want to live differently now," he said, his voice steady, not chasing the rush, not trying to be perfect. The birds above seemed to echo her words. Far away at Buckingham Palace, the official statement was prepared for release. It was short, but full of relief. His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, is making a strong recovery. The royal family expresses their deepest gratitude for the nation's love and prayers. Across Britain and across the world, the message spread. There were tears, smiles, and a collective sigh of relief. But here, in the quiet of Windsor, there were no cameras, no headlines, only peace. William continued walking slowly through the garden paths, stopping now and then to touch the flowers or look at the sunlight breaking through the trees. Catherine walked silently beside him, her presence a calm anchor. As they neared the center of the garden, they came upon a small clearing, one that held a single young tree. It stood with slender branches reaching upward, its leaves bright with morning dew. William stopped. For a long moment he just looked at it. Then, in a voice barely above a breath, he said, "I planted this with her. I used to come here to talk to her after she was gone." He knelt slowly, the ground cool beneath his knees. Catherine stood back, giving him the quiet he wanted. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the soil. It felt alive under his palm, warm from the sun. He stared at the small tree for a moment, his eyes glassy with emotion. "I made it through," he whispered. "I'm still here, Mom." The words hung in the air, carried away softly by the wind. Catherine knelt beside him, placing her hand gently over his. Neither spoke. The silence was not empty. It was full of love, memory, and the fragile beauty of survival. After a while, William stood again, taking in the garden around him. "Everything feels different now," he said. "I used to walk through here thinking about what I wanted to do next, the speeches, the meetings, the image. Now, I just want to walk and breathe." Catherine smiled faintly. Maybe that's what life was always supposed to be, not the rush, but the moments in between. He turned to her with a small smile. "You sound like her," he said softly. She used to say that. They began walking again, the sun growing warmer on their backs. The palace bells chimed in the distance, a sound that once marked duty, now marking peace. The world was waking up. But in the garden, time moved slower. As they reached the edge of the path, William looked out across the fields beyond the walls. "When I was lying there," he said quietly, "I kept seeing faces. You, Father, the children, but also her. It was as if she was waiting at the edge of the light, smiling. I think she told me to come back." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. William nodded, the corners of his mouth lifting in a faint, wistful smile. "I hope so," he said. "I hope I can make her proud. Not as a prince, but as her son." They reached the bench again and sat together, listening to the rustle of leaves. Somewhere nearby, a robin landed on a branch, its red chest bright against the green. William watched it for a long time. "She loved robins," he murmured. Catherine smiled. "Then maybe she's saying hello." He laughed softly, the sound warm and light, a sound that had been missing for far too long. For a while they said nothing more. The garden was alive around them, bees drifting lazily from flower to flower, the air thick with summer scent. Finally, William turned to Catherine and said, "Promise me something." "Anything," she replied. "Promise me we'll keep life like this. Simple, honest, just real." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "I promise." He leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face. For the first time in months, he wasn't thinking about appearances or expectations. He was simply there, a man, alive, grateful. From the palace to the quietest village, Britain rejoiced in his recovery. But only in this garden did the full meaning of that miracle unfold. As the morning grew brighter, William walked once more to the small tree. He rested his hand on its trunk, his fingers brushing the leaves. "You've grown," he whispered, almost smiling. "And so have I." A soft breeze answered, rustling the branches as though in approval. He stood there a long while, feeling the world around him, alive, fragile, beautiful.